Okay, so I've got Visual Studio 2019 open here, and we're gonna go down and create a new project. So we're gonna search for the Blazor app template and hit next, and we're gonna create a new project. So let's call this Flappy Bird. I'm gonna call this Flappy Bird demo, and then I'm gonna specify that the project is a web project, and I'm just going to keep the solution name as Flappy Bird Demo. So naming the project Flappy Bird Demo.web, solution Flappy Bird Demo. Everything else looks good. So we're going to hit create. And then we have the option to choose either Blazor WebAssembly or Blazor Server. We are going to be focusing on Blazor WebAssembly in this, but Blazor Server, we could do the same thing here. It's more just the behind the scenes of how it's working is what's going to be different. But you could essentially make this application using either of these. So anyway, Blazor WebAssembly app, we're going to keep all of this the same. So keep configure for HTTPS checked. We're not going to have it be ASP.NET Core hosted. This would scaffold out a client-side project, a server-side project, and a shared project for us, which is too much. That's not what we want to do right now. So keep this unchecked. And then we're also going to keep progressive web application unchecked. So straight out of the box, Blazor WebAssembly app. We will hit create, and Visual Studio will scaffold out a demo application for us. So let's go ahead and run this just to make sure that everything is working as expected. And we will see the Blazor template. So if you've used Blazor before, then you've seen this template. It just has a simple home page with hello world and a link to a survey. It has a counter page which shows you that you can hit the button and the number goes up. And then there's the fetch data page, which gives you some weather forecast data. So all of these things are working. So it looks like our template application loaded correctly. So we are good to go. So the first thing that I want to do for this, so that we are really like starting from the ground up, is to just delete everything that we don't need. So the template version, the Blazor template comes with a lot of stuff. So let's go ahead and we're gonna go through this project and delete the stuff we don't want. So in the CSS folder, we're gonna just delete all of Bootstrap. We're not gonna be using a CSS framework for this. And same thing with Open Iconic, we don't want that. So all we're doing in terms of CSS is just this one style sheet, app.css. And even in here, so we're gonna come into app.css and we're gonna just delete almost everything in here. Now you could delete everything in here. This is just my preference to leave this Blazor error UI styling here. This is something that's in the template that if something happens with your app, something goes wrong, an exception is thrown, it'll just show a little message on the browser screen saying, hey, your app messed up. And if you are curious, the div for this is in the index.html file. So if you wanted to truly start from scratch and delete everything from app.css, you also want to come in here to index.html and delete this div. Otherwise, it's going to show up because by default it's just a div with no styling. So anyway, we're going to keep it because I think it's useful. And we'll continue on. So the sample data folder has this data that the forecast page pulls from, which we don't need. So we're going to delete that folder. Okay, and so that's good for up here for the root folder. Now let's go into pages, and we're going to delete that counter page, and we're going to delete that fetch data page. And we're just going to leave this index.razor page. So this will be our one page in this application. We're going to delete the survey prompt as well. That's a component that is in the shared folder right here that we are also going to delete. So we deleted the pages. We're going to delete the survey prompt and the nav menu. These are two components that are used. This main layout page is different. This is the layout that all of our pages are going to use. So any page that we create is going to render in this @body location. If we look in the app.razor file, we'll see that it's specified that which layout we're going to use. So we could create multiple layouts, but we are just going to stick to the main layout, and we are going to delete everything in the main layout except for @body, which is just saying just show what's in the page, whatever page is being loaded up. Okay, everything else we're going to keep. So let's just run our app, make sure we didn't break anything by deleting a bunch of stuff. And all we should see is this hello world message, welcome to your new app, which is from the index page right here. So if we look at the index page, you'll see this @page up here. So this is saying, hey, I am a Blazor page. If we did not have this @page up here, then this would be a Razor component, which would need to be embedded inside of a Razor page in order to be seen, just like we saw with the survey prompt that we had deleted down here. Okay, so now let's start to add pieces of our game. So I'm going to right click on the solution and say add new folder, and I'm going to call this folder components. And I'm going to add a new Razor component within that folder, and we're going to call this game container. And this is going to hold all of the content of our game. So I'm going to type in some HTML in here. This comes directly from the original tutorial video. So if you want more detail into the HTML and CSS side of things, you can go watch the original that's linked down below. I'm going to skim past this because it's not super important to us, but I'll explain on a basic level. So this game container div is going to hold our game. Inside of the game container div, we're going to add a sky element, which will represent the sky. And we're going to add a ground element, which will represent the ground. And then inside the sky div, we're going to add a bird div. So we've got a game container, the sky and the ground are going to fill up the game container. That's how we're going to write the CSS. And then the bird is going to exist within the sky. Okay, so let's add some styling to this so that we can actually see what's going on here. And I'm going to paste this in. So I'm going to come up to the top of our app.css file and just paste in this code, the CSS. So we're styling our game container. We're giving it a fixed width and height. With the sky, we're giving all of our elements a fixed width and height. The sky height and the ground height are going to add up to the game container height. So it spans the full height of the game container. And the width of the sky and the width of the ground is the same as the width of the game container. So the sky and the ground elements fill up the entire area of the game container. And then lastly, we have our bird element or bird class, and we are giving it a fixed width and height of 60 pixels wide and 45 pixels tall. And we are giving a gap of 220 pixels from the left-hand side of the bird, which will make it appear in the middle of our screen. Okay, so now we have our game container component, and we've styled the elements that are in here. And so now, in order to view what's in our game container, we need to put this inside of a Blazor page. And so index.razor, because it has this page directive at the top, is a Blazor page. So we're going to use this page. Let's reference game container within the index.razor page, and you can see IntelliSense auto completed this to include the entire namespace. But what I'm going to do is copy and cut this out and come into our imports.razor file, and we are going to add in a using statement here to include this namespace so that we don't have to keep including it in our Razor pages and Razor components. Just to demonstrate here, if I went into the game container and gave this a page directive, so let's say this is /game. Let's just see what that does so we can demonstrate. So now this is a Blazor page. So when we load our app up, we are in index.razor right now, and this is the content of index.razor, and we can see our ground and our sky and our bird. If we went to /game, we would see the same thing. If we went to /I don't know, it would say sorry, there's nothing here. So we could give this a page directive and use it as a component. It's not, they're not mutually exclusive things. But we're just going to keep this just as a component, and we're just going to put it inside index.razor so it's automatically the first thing that loads up for us. Okay, so now we've got some elements on the screen, and we want to see if we can make them move without using JavaScript. So we can do this with Blazor. And we're going to do this we're going to first add some models here. So I'm going to create a folder called models, and I'm going to add in a class. We're going to call it game manager. And game manager is going to be the class that monitors and controls what's going on at a high level in our game. So this is going to contain the references to all of the other model classes that we're going to use. This will become more clear as we get into it. So let's also create a model class for our bird element, and we're going to call this bird model. And so we want our bird to fall to the ground. That'll be the first thing that we accomplish in this game. So what needs to happen is the bird's vertical position needs to change over time. So we need a variable to control the bird's distance from the ground. So I'm going to create a property here called distance from ground, and I'm going to just give it a default value of 100. I'm also going to remove all of our unused using statements. That's totally not required, but is a habit of mine. So great. So now we have a bird model, and we have this one property which will allow us to control its distance from the ground. So let's go into our game manager, and we're going to add a bird model object to the game. So let's say bird model bird. We're going to make this public, and then let's instantiate it in our constructor. So we're going to say bird equals new bird model. I'm going to remove the using statements from this too. Great, so now we have this bird model class. It has this distance from ground. That is being referenced within our game manager. So our game manager currently holds a bird object. And so now we can add a reference, or now we're going to reference the game manager from our game container. So let's go into here. And at the bottom of this page, we're going to do @code. And this is where we're going to put some of our C# code. So we're going to add a game, not game container, a game manager to our game container. And this is going to throw some red squigglies at me because it doesn't know where to find game manager. So let's go into imports and also add a using for the models folder. Okay, so we are going to instantiate this game manager object using this method, protected override void on initialized. So you can see that there's three options here. There's on initialized, which is going to be called once when the component is first initialized. There's going to be the on component or on parameters set method, which will be called after our parameters are set if we had any. So we'll see that later on, an instance of that. And then we have on after render, which will be called anytime the component re-renders. So we're going to use the on initialized method because we just care about this executing when the component is loaded up initially. And we're going to say game manager is new game manager. Okay, so now we have this game manager reference within our game container, and we want to access the bird model object to set the bird's distance from the ground. So we're going to do that by adding some styling by referencing a string. So we're going to say string, we're going to call this bird CSS, and this is going to return this CSS-like string where we're going to say bottom, and we're going to pass in the game manager.bird.ground property and say that's in pixels. And this has now converted essentially this just integer from our C# class into this CSS string. And we're going to reference that string directly from this div by saying style equals. We're going to do an @ to say what comes next is C#, and then we're going to say bird CSS. And so now this is going to reference this string right here. You do not always have to put an @. Sometimes it's smart enough to know whether or not you're going to be putting C# code somewhere. But because this the style attribute expects a string, we needed to be specific and say, hey, I'm not typing bird CSS as a string, I'm typing it as a reference. So cool, let's run this and see if this has done anything. Awesome, so now our bird is generating 100 pixels above the ground, and we controlled that just using C#. So that's pretty cool. What would be even cooler is if it fell to the ground over time, if it animated over time. So how are we going to do that? So let's go back into our game manager, and I'm going to write, I'm going to write a new method. It's going to be an async method called main loop. And this is going to be the loop that executes over and over again throughout the course of our game. So this is going to be a while loop in here, and we're going to just pass in true right now just so that it executes over and over and over again. In the future, we'll replace this with a check to check if the game is running. Actually, let's just add that now. So up here, I'm going to say public bool is running. This is going to represent whether or not the game is currently running. Let's give it a default value of false, even though this is already the default value of a Boolean, but just to be explicit. And we will say while is running, and we will run this loop. Now, is running is false, so we need a way to set this to true. Right now, let's just set it to true right above our while loop. Okay, so our game manager has this main loop method. When this is called, it's going to set is running to true, and then it's going to execute this while loop over and over and over and over again. So this is where we're going to tell the bird that we want it to fall. So let's go into our bird model class and let's create a method here called fall, where we will make the bird fall. So we need to decide how far we want the bird to fall each time this is called. So I'm going to actually pass in an argument here called gravity, say, and we will subtract out gravity from the bird's distance from the ground. So if we go back into our manager class, we can say bird.fall, and we need to pass in some number to tell it how much to fall, which we're going to call gravity. So I'm going to come up here and set, I'm going to make a read-only variable here. Private read-only integer, we're going to call this gravity, and we're going to say that this is equal to 2. So the bird is going to fall 2 pixels every time that this method is called. So we don't want this to be executing over and over and over again so fast that this just happens as fast as possible. We want to put in a little time buffer here so that this is called only X amount of time. And so we're just going to say await task.delay, and I'm going to say 20. This will say wait 20 milliseconds. So this loop in total says bird, fall by 2 pixels, and then wait 20 milliseconds, and then fall 2 pixels, and then wait 20 milliseconds. And that will be our loop. So I'm going to hit run on this, and we will see that the behavior here, actually, we have not called this yet from the container. So let's go do that. So we have this way of starting this loop, but we need to actually call main loop in order for it to start. So let's do that. So we're in our game container here. I'm going to say at on click within this first game container div. And we're going to say start game. And we're going to write a method down here right now called void start game. And this is going to call game manager main loop. So what's going to happen is when I click on the game container, an on-click event will be raised, which we have assigned to say call this method. Then when we call this method, we're going to call the main loop method within game manager, and then this is going to execute this loop over and over again. So now I will hit play, but what we'll see is that we're not exactly getting the behavior that we expect. So if I click and click again and click again and click again, you'll see that the bird keeps falling, but it only is falling when I click my mouse. So why is it doing that? The reason it's doing that is because the container does not know that it needs to re-render this element here. It has no idea about what's going on behind the scenes. So we need a way to alert the game container to say, hey, something inside of you has changed, so can you please re-render? So we're gonna do that, and we're gonna do that by using the iNotify property changed. So this is an interface that we're implementing on the game manager class. I'm going to control dot and say implement interface, and this will add the property changed event handler property changed event. So what we're going to do is we are going to raise this event whenever the bird model changes. So we're going to come into our main loop here, and we know that the bird just fell 2 pixels here. So after this method, we're going to say, hey, a property changed. So we're going to do that by saying property changed question mark dot invoke. The sender is this game manager, and then we're going to say new property changed event args name of, we're going to just say bird. So the bird object has changed after the fall method. So fall, notify that something changed, await 20 milliseconds is now what our loop reads. Now, we need to go into our game container and tell it what to do when the property changed event is raised. So we're going to come in here right after we create the new instance of our game manager. We're going to also say a game manager property changed event. We're going to take this and we're going to say, whoops, we're going to say state has changed. So when the property changed event is raised, we are going to call state has changed. And state has changed is a method which will cause this component to re-render. So now that we've done that, if we hit play, and we click on the screen, we'll see now the bird is continuously falling down. So that's what we want. Now it is falling down indefinitely through the ground, so that's maybe not exactly what we want, but we're closer than we were before. So let's make the game stop when the bird hits the ground. So let's go into our game manager here. And what we want to do when the game stops is to stop executing this loop. So we need to add a check in here to see if the bird has collided with the ground. So we're going to come back into our while loop, and we're going to add a little more stuff in here. So the first part of this is say, okay, fall 2 pixels and then update the UI. Now we're going to add in a check here to say if the bird's distance from ground, I'm going to say is less than or equal to 0. Equals 0 is fine too, but this is just to be extra sure. If the bird is less than 0 pixels from the ground, we definitely want the game to stop. So I'm going to keep that there, and we're going to set is running to false. Okay, so make the bird fall 2 pixels, notify the UI that the property changed, check if the bird is on the ground. If it is, stop the game. Otherwise, we're going to wait 20 milliseconds and we're going to do this loop again. So now let's run the game again. And we'll click on the screen and we'll see that the game stops, the bird stops falling when it hits the ground. You'll notice if I click on the screen here, the bird will continue to fall. And actually, if I set this to equals 0, So it's only going to stop the game when the bird is exactly on the ground. Then if I click again, this will continue to fall. So maybe we want to change this a little bit. I'm going to change this back to less than or equal to, because I feel like that is a safer statement here. But let's make the game reset when main loop is called. So let's separate these things out into some smaller methods here. So I'm going to say, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to say public void start game. And what we want to do when we start a game is create a new instance of our bird model. New bird model. And then we want to call main loop. Okay. So let's go into our game container and let's get rid of this. And when we click on the game, let's just call start game from the game manager. Now, we also want to make sure that a new game isn't started if the game's already running. So let's just add a check in here that says not is null, is running. If the game is not running, you can start a new game. Otherwise, this method's not going to do anything. Okay. Let's also write a method here called game over. So we have a start and end game. And all this is going to do is set is running to false. And then we will call, we'll call game over instead of directly setting that property here. Okay, so our loop's going to work the same. We have this start game method that we've now pointed this click event to. So let's try this out. So we're going to click. The bird's going to fall to the ground. Great. Let's click again. We'll see that it starts up again and again. But if the game is not over, my click doesn't do anything. Cool. So that is going to be it for the first part of this tutorial series. So if you enjoyed this, let me know. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I will be back with a part 2 of this very shortly. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.